So we have an incoming attempt to demonetize and ban conservative voices on YouTube, like Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, and many others, by the New York Times and their friends in an activist hate group, as the content creators I'm talking about framed it, called Medium Matters. And Medium Matters, let me see, here it was. So Benny Johnson was bringing articles about how they were being sued. Quote, the DNC activist masquerading as a New York Times reporter is using research from the completely discredited far-left hate group Medium Matters. Medium Matters is in active liquidation after facing multiple federal lawsuits for knowingly and maliciously fabricating their reporting. And he's bringing a CNBC, so very left-wing outlet, article about how X is allowed to proceed in a trial against Medium Matters after a Texas judge denies dismissal request. And so the understanding I got is essentially Medium Matters has been printing a lot of articles that basically defame right-wing content creators or dissenting, let's say, voices on YouTube and other social media. And they were malicious about it. They lied. So we can take it as read that they are not credible, that they are partisan, and that they are probably lying. And what exactly are they trying to write? Well, Ben Shapiro says here he received this text from them. Basically, they're saying, hey, we are the New York Times, wanted to give you an opportunity to comment for an upcoming article that takes a look at how political commentators have discussed the upcoming election on YouTube. And they're saying we identified 286 YouTube videos that contained election of Ben Shapiro specifically, that contained election misinformation, including narratives that have been debunked or are not supported with credible evidence. Researchers identified videos posted by you in those formats that contain election misinformation. We feature a clip of you saying your party rigged many of the voting rules in advance of the election in order to ensure an extraordinary number of mail-in ballot harvesting, and so on. Well, essentially, he's going to show, there it is. If it's election misinformation to point out the rigging of the voting rules for election 2020, resulting in massive mail-in voting and ballot harvesting, then the New York Times might want to talk to the New York Times and CBS News for starters. And he brings their own articles specifically saying things like California expanded its ballot collection program in 2016 to allow any person, not just a relative or housemate, to collect an absentee ballot, and operatives can be paid for ballot harvesting in California, but the compensation can't be calculated based on the number of ballots they collect. Weasel words, you've essentially allowed ballot harvesting and you've relaxed the rules on mail-in voting, which essentially makes it less certain that the person who actually mailed you this is the person who has the right to vote. He keeps going, saying things like, even if someone does think Joe Biden didn't win the election, that is still protected speech under the First Amendment. Absolutely true. The entire misinformation narrative is nonsense, because what they're doing is they're crafting their own specific narrative around the worldview, which means we say this is what happened, and we don't 100% prove it's true. We use a lot of weasel words and broad language so that you could very well interpret it as being completely untrue, but we still claim this to be the only truth, and anyone who says anything otherwise is misinformation and should be banned. And it usually is left after the viewer, the listener, to make up their own minds, unless of course you can empirically prove that something is a lie. That's the standard that we used to have for freedom of speech, and it wasn't enough to prove that something was a lie for defamation, because specifically lying didn't carry any sentence. You were allowed to lie. You weren't allowed to defame someone or slander someone in a way that caused them, how to put it, appreciable harm, like something that can be quantified. So if you lied that somebody committed the crime, for example, and they were fired because of it, then you caused them harm, right? Because they were fired because of your lies. So then you need to compensate them. But if you lied and said that the front lawn in their yard is filled full of pink grass, you can say that. That's fine, because no harm is done. Nobody cares that you lie. It's not going to impact their life in any meaningful way. Therefore, as far as I know, it's legal. So what Media Matters, the New York Times, and many others are doing is that they're trying to craft a political narrative, and political disagreement has always been considered something that is protected under free speech, obviously. You'll notice that when the media is wrong, like for example with the Hunter Biden laptop story, where they claimed it was Russian misinformation, and it was true, they're not punished for it. They're not removed off the air for it. If, let's say, for example, a day after the elections, all right, you say, well, I think there was something not kosher going on. Something, let's say, criminal or illegal went on in that. And it hasn't been checked yet. What you're doing is speculating or giving your personal opinion, and that's legal. Unless, of course, you are talking against the election of a Democrat or left-wing president. They were talking about how Trump is not my president and he didn't really win against Clinton in 2016. For 4 years, they had all the investigations you could possibly think of. They were talking about it day and night in the newspapers. You can still find them in clips on YouTube. So many Democrats talking about how Trump stole the election in 2016. But once the 2020 election came in, safe and secure, an election cannot be stolen. And anyone who says otherwise is undermining democracy. And that's what happened. And YouTube, I'm not saying that anything untoward happened in the 2020 elections. I know my place. But I'm simply pointing out the fact that before the 2020 election, everyone was allowed to question elections. And then that specific election is, forbidden to be questioned under your terms of service. That's the world we live in. So, he says, Ben Shapiro here is saying, this is totally scandalous. In 2020, the legacy media shut down the dissemination of the Hunter Biden laptop story and lauded the claim that it was all Russian disinformation, all to get Joe Biden elected. In 2024, they're even more brazen. They are openly trying to intimidate YouTube, one of the most dominant news platforms in America, into shutting down anyone who isn't pro-Kamala. 26% of adults in the US get news from YouTube. This is a research paper that he's showing here. So essentially, he's saying the New York Times wants a comment. Here's my comment. Kindly go F yourself. And that's the same as you can get from Tucker Carlson, where basically he gets the same message from them about how good day, Mr. Carlson, I'm Nico Grant from the New York Times. We are relying on analysis conducted by researchers at Media Matters, etc., etc. And he gets this text from Carlson back. Quote, so the New York Times is working with a left-wing hate group to silence critics of the Democratic Party. Please ask yourself why you're participating in it. This is why you got into journalism. It's shameful. I hope you're filled with guilt and self-loathing for sending me a text like this. Please quote me. And then they asked him, would you like to address any of the points or questions above? He answers, would I like to participate in your attempt to censor me? No thanks. But I do hope you'll quote what I wrote above, and also know that I told you to F off, which I am now doing. Thanks. It's the same sentiment from pretty much all of them. Rudy Giuliani is saying the New York Times is working with the partisan left-wing Media Matters to silence Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, and me. We are particularly honored by the designation as number one among major YouTube creators. We are proud to be included with Ben and Tucker, two great patriots. And he is bringing the same message that was sent to Tucker and Ben Shapiro, and Benny Johnson is doing the same. He is showing the specific email he got, and he's saying, I was just informed the New York Times is writing a hit piece on me. What did I do? Number one, I said Democrats created an open border without sufficient evidence, which anyone with eyes can see. I don't understand how is that misinformation. Number two, that lawfare against Trump is 2024 election interference. I mean, you are literally suing the opposing candidate in a billion jurisdictions, specifically under very left-wing jurisdictions where the judges were appointed by left-wing presidents and in places where people overwhelmingly hate Trump. And finally, that Kamala's DNC nomination without a primary was rigged. I mean, was there a primary? No. So whether you want to phrase it as rigged or anything else, a more legitimate term, if you will, a more polite or diplomatic term, doesn't really matter. The fact that he was saying that was that Kamala Harris got the nomination without a primary. And he didn't like it. He thinks it's a bad thing and it's anti-democratic. And honestly, in a democracy, you are supposed to vote for your candidate. So I'd say that that's kind of true. What here is misinformation? It's saying a bad word, and it's not even like a slur. It's just a term that's, how to put it, isn't very diplomatic to frame an issue. Is suddenly misinformation? Can I call every single leftist that compares Trump to the Austrian painter from Germany misinformation? Is that what we're doing now? Seriously, saying that Kamala's DNC nomination was rigged is disinformation. It's just, there's a limit. In fact, all of the claims that he brings here are factual. We don't like your framing of this issue, even though we do 10 times worse, therefore you are misinformation and should be banned. I don't know what kind of rules for me, but not for thee, but not for me attitude they are displaying here. But it's over the top. The hypocrisy is just crazy. It's amazing to me that they can do this on a wide scale, mind you. This is not just one or two people. Rudy Giuliani was counting himself and Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson, but Benny Johnson's also in there and some others as well. They can expand it as it goes along too. If it works, then they'll just go, well, these guys are also in it. Here you go. There's similar things they've said. They said that they didn't approve of the way that Kamala received the nomination. They said that they didn't like the way that the election rules in the US were modified before the 2020 election, and so on and so forth. Anyone pointing facts that are unpleasant for the Democrats or framing them in a way that is unfriendly to the Democrats and Kamala Harris is now misinformation and should be banned off of YouTube. I mean, I'm having a very hard time just trying to frame my thoughts in a way that is YouTube friendly. English is not my first language, and I constantly have to think not about what I'm saying, but about, can I say this? Is this a topic that I'm allowed to discuss? Are these words and phrases that I'm allowed to utter? It's just taking half of my attention span. And even so, even as restricted as we are on YouTube, they still go, oh no, that's not good enough. You should be banned for not liking my candidate, not liking my politics, therefore ban. This is so tiresome. This is so exaggerated and over the top. I don't understand how could anyone not see we are moving towards what, in my opinion, is fascism at a breakneck speed. It's just, what is fascism? It's the marriage of corporations and the state. If you listen to Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, you know, where the word comes from, we all talk about fascism bad because fascism was basically the ally of, you know, the 1930s bad Germans. They were almost as bad. They were fascists. Yeah, what do they call their way of governance? It's like the marriage of corporations and worker unions, incidentally, with the state. Everything within the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. And this is what we're seeing. Essentially, you go, yeah, I don't like the way the government did X, and not the Twitter kind of X, the other. How the government did X, Y, and Z, and then they go, well, you framed the issue in a way that we disapprove of, therefore you are misinformation peddling, go out. We no longer allow you within the conversation. It's just the marketplace of ideas cannot contain such evil. The poor plebes don't have a brain. They can't make up their own minds. If they hear your lies, which are basically just facts that are framed unfavorably for us, therefore they will all become, I don't know, psychotic and enraged and start doing bad things. I have no idea how they explain this even to themselves. It's just so exaggerated. Do they really believe you're children? that you can't make up your own mind, that you're not allowed to be exposed to someone saying that the DNC nomination of Kamala Harris without a primary is rigging, that going in and suing the opposing party candidate, especially as he's leading in the polls, is election interference, that Democrats created an open border without sufficient evidence. Like, what kind of evidence do you need? In fact, there have been so many exaggerated claims from the Democrats on so many issues, and none of it is considered misinformation, even though they go and say, oh, well, for example, Trump was against the, aid in fertilization for women. I forgot how it's called right now. And he basically said the government's going to pay for it to help women that need it. And they lied about it. It's perfectly allowed. Do you remember the protests with the tiki torches, where there were basically people protesting for and against the removal of historical statues, and then some nutjobs went with tiki torches and basically showed their allegiance to the Klan? And Trump said about the people with the statues, look, there's good people on both sides of the debate, but the bad guys in white sheets, they weren't wearing them, but they were parroting them, I think. These guys should be condemned totally. And the media just went with he actually said that the good people on both sides about the bad guys. And they kept doing it for years. In fact, I think even today, Kamala Harris still parrots that lie, despite the fact that their own debunking groups, like the fact-checkers, including the left-wing, very biased fact-checkers like Snopes, have already debunked this. And that's not misinformation, that's fine. You can keep it on. You can stay on air on YouTube, despite the fact that you peddle this, but not if you call the border open. That's too much. That's over the line. Not if you say that suing the opposing candidates is rigging the election. Not if you say that Kamala Harris was nominated without a primary and that's bad. We can't have such opinions. That's too evil. You can't say that the rules were changed before the election, even though you rely on the New York Times and CBS to say it. That's just not allowed. It's just a opposing narrative to the government based on the mainstream media is not allowed. If Ben Shapiro quoting the New York Times and then saying I don't like it is not allowed, then what opposition is possibly allowed today to the government, to the large corporations? It's just, we need to win this election. We have to win this election. I don't know how the West will look after 4 more years of this. It's just, I watched the Lotus Sitters about what happens in Britain, and it's heartbreaking. Really. I enjoyed so many books about Britain in my youth. Jules Verne was one of my favorite writers, and I had a vision in my head of what Britain looks like. And what you can see now on news is nothing like it. And you see people basically mourning their lost country, and they're being ridiculed and gaslit. It's just, it's insufferable, it's intolerable. The West is going downhill fast, and the only way to bring it back is to vehemently oppose anything woke, anything globalist, anything left-wing. Distrust the institutions, distrust the big businesses, and essentially acknowledge that they are treating you as the enemy in a Cold War. That's my take on it. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.